Greetings everybody out there. Today's guide presents to you a classic. We are looking into the Unhallowed Essence Multishot Demon Hunter, and we're specifically going to be talking about doing speedy Greater Rifts. I like to target Greater Rift 70 as a benchmark for getting very fast Greater Rift clears done, and I have some video for you today to showcase one of my fastest clears that I got when I was working on testing this just yesterday on my stream. So as you can see on screen here, we've got the Unhallowed Essence Multishot Demon Hunter working for us, and the gameplay is very classic. You know it well probably from many seasons and patches of playing. You stand back at range, and it's a focus and restraint build, so you're alternating using that generator, especially when you're getting low on your resources, when you're throwing out as many multi-shots as we are, and then when you have that generator side of focus and restraint procced, you're then of course throwing out as many multi-shots as you can. This build also uses a convention of elements, although I'll talk about an alternate version that would actually go without it, but this build does use a convention of elements, so whenever you see that fire section come up, you can know that you'll be particularly potent in your damage output, so you can go absolutely balls to the wall, just empty out your hatred and know that many things will die in one shot because you just have such expanded elemental power. There I ran into a little dead end, so even if I didn't run into that little snafu, we could have had a faster time, but this is, as you can see, a very fast clear of a Greater Rift. We got a good Greater Rift in general, so that helps a lot, of course, but overall, even if you're not getting a particularly fantastic layout or really good mobs or really high elite density, this build still clears through. I was getting an average of about 3 minutes 30 seconds with my setup. So you can expect to receive similar results when you have a similar gear level. You can also notice that whenever we're clicking on the pylons in the Greater Rift, that we are spawning elites because we're using Nemesis bracers. That's another thing that just helps keep the flow of the Greater Rift going, helps you get more progression throughout the Greater Rift because every pylon will represent progress for you. When an elite pops out of there, you just touch it and you go. And you don't need a Wraps of Clarity. Normally that would be the other bracer option that you would go for the defense, but because you're in a Greater Rift 70 and you're at good gear level, you should be fine on defense to be able to afford wearing Nemesis bracers. It helps you along quite a bit. And of course, after this video is over, after the exhibition is done, we will go and give you the details on all the skills and the gear, the gearing options, what you want in the cube, Paragon priorities, things like that. But I did want to start out with some quick gameplay for you, just so you can see how truly expedient and quick this thing can really be when it's firing on all cylinders. And here you can see we got the Guardian, nice easy fight with the Infernal Maiden, and Fire COE comes up and Infernal Maiden goes down. And that's a 2 minute 50-second clear, so a sub 3 minute clear, not too shabby. So if we hop into the game here now, you can see I have on screen my setup that's saved at the armory, and we can start to dig into the different pieces. So it is an Unhallowed Essence build, as I mentioned, so we're utilizing that set. If you want to go over the powers real quick, the 2-piece set bonus makes it so that your generators generate 2 additional hatred and 1 discipline, so that helps you. Like I mentioned, you are spending quite furiously when you're using multi-shot. So you want to make sure that you get that hatred coming back in, and also you get some discipline too, because you do vault around quite a bit, and that's going to use up your discipline. So using your spender or using your generator helps out on both sides of your resources. The 4-piece set bonus gains 60% damage reduction and deals 60% increased damage for 8 seconds if no enemies within 10 yards of you. So again, it's kind of pushing you towards that ranged gameplay. The more at range you are, then the safer you will be. And you'll also keep these bonuses up for yourself, taking less damage and dealing more damage. And then last but not least, the 6-piece set bonus. This gives you a ton of damage. Your generators, multi-shot, and vengeance deal 40% increased damage for every point of discipline you have. So this makes it so that you really want to stack up as much discipline as you possibly can. There are a couple of slots in particular where you can get discipline as a secondary affix. That would be your cloak, your quiver, and your bow. So all of those you want to make sure that you have at least a discipline roll You know, it can be the minimum of 9. You would like to get the maximum of 12 if you can, but you at least want to make sure it's present, because it's going to help boost up your discipline quite a bit, along with a skill that we also use that we'll get into in just a moment. So, natural gearing, progression, we have the helm for the Unhallowed Essence. They all have different names, so you can throw out the names. Dex Vit, critical damage, and a socket on there. And most of these pieces are ancient because I have really good Unhallowed gear. Here you could also consider, instead of Vitality, if you want to run really thin, just go with critical hit chance and also get multi-shot damage on your helm. But I like to run with a little Vitality, just, you know, for safety and hardcore. Then on our torso here, on our chest piece, we've got Dex Vit All Res and some sockets. And then, like I mentioned, make sure that you have that max discipline as a secondary on the cloak. Very important for the damage output. Oh, and the thing to note too is the discipline bonus is active. So if you're running, like, let's say you do a ton of vaulting, you have to like really charge through an area and you just need to use up a lot of vaults, you're going to use a lot of discipline, and it actually cuts into your damage. So it's whatever your active discipline is at. So you need to be topped up on discipline to be doing maximum damage. So whenever you do use a lot of discipline, we have a skill that we'll get into that you can use to replenish some of that discipline right away. And then we have some emeralds in the sockets there for just more DPS output. We have the Unhallowed Essence shoulders. Here I go Dex Vit, All Res, and cooldown reduction. And here you want that CDR. This is a great slot to get it because we are using a Dawn in the cube. That makes it so that we get 65% cooldown reduction for Vengeance. And in order to have 100% uptime on Vengeance, you need 37% CDR between the rest of your gear and Paragon. So you can max out and get 10% through Paragon, and then you need it on 3 other slots, and I usually like to get one of them for the CDR on my shoulders. Another slot I like to get it is on the quiver, and then one of my rings. So that is where you should target your CDR. You can also grab it on the bow, but there's other things you want to prioritize on your bow. You can also get it on your gloves as well too. Here I just went for Dex Vit, critical hit chance, and critical hit damage. But here, instead of Vit, for instance, you could go for a CDR roll, and then maybe you don't take it on your quiver or your ring. So there is some options for gearing. Next up, we have the Witching Hour, a purely offensive belt. You got Dex Vit, attack speed, and critical hit damage here. And those are your ideal. You want that critical hit damage to be as close to that 50% as you can get it, just for more damage output. Next up, we have the Unhallowed Essence pants, Dex Vit All Res, and sockets with some emeralds in there. Pretty standard stuff. We got the boots with Dex Vit All Res and multi-shot damage. You can get multi-shot on your boots, so you definitely want to aim for that. You can fill in your movement speed with Paragon, so don't worry about it. Just go Dex Vit All Res multi-shot. Let's pop up for jewelry here. We have a Hellfire Amulet. Here, the ideal Hellfire Amulet would be fire damage percent, because we are using a fire damage build. Critical hit damage, and then critical hit chance. That would be the best overall, but this one is not too shabby either. We have dexterity, critical hit damage, critical hit chance, and the Cull the Weak passive. There are a bunch of really good Demon Hunter passives, so you can get any number of them, but Cull the Weak is very good for reasons that we'll get into when we talk about the rest of the skills. Like I mentioned, Nemesis Bracers, we have those working for us, so we can get those elites coming for us, get the density of elites. Here we have fire skills, increased damage, Dex Vit, and critical hit chance, pretty standard there. Next are our rings, focus and restraint build, like I mentioned before. And on my rings I have critical hit damage, critical hit chance, and some area damage. Area damage is pretty decent in this build. You already have such a ridiculous spread of AoE that area damage it doesn't matter too much, but say for instance if you're playing in a party and you have like a monk that's grouping stuff up, then your multi-shot will be even more potent, so you could get some area damage in the build. But this is also an opportunity to get some CDR as well too, or maybe even just an average damage roll for hitting it even harder. And then our restraint has critical hit damage, area damage, and cooldown reduction. So here I could even go instead critical hit damage, critical hit chance, cooldown reduction. There's a little bit of flexibility in your jewelry slots. And our quiver, We want Dex Vit, attack speed, critical hit chance, like I mentioned, cooldown reduction, and then a nice multi-shot roll there. It can range from 75 to 100, so you definitely want to keep an eye out for one that's on the higher side. And the secondary here, again, very important to get max discipline. So this one has a reroll for 12. And the multi-shot hits enemies below 60% health twice. That's a legendary power on there. So whenever enemies get to 60% health or below, and this can range from 50 to 60, you want to aim for the higher side so that you invoke this power sooner than later. Your multi-shots are basically doubling in damage, so it's really awesome. Once you can tell too when it happens because enemies will just start to lose health rapidly. And this synergizes very nicely with the ambush passive that we also use. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then last but not least, the Yang's Recurve, the weapon that brings this whole thing together. This is the king of multi-shot. So here we have some really nice base damage. I've been re-rolling it. Came with a 10% damage roll, got high dexterity, a max attack speed roll, close to max all resource cost reduction, a Cull the Sun's Despair on there, augmented it, and then put a Ramalani's Gift on there for the sake with an emerald for some more critical hit damage. And then the secondary, of course, you want max discipline. So this is a really good Yang's Recurve. I got very lucky to get this one. And the legendary power is that multi-shot attacks 50% faster. So again, this is what's allowing you to just tear through your hatred, spam out multi-shots as fast as possible. You definitely want a Yang's Recurve if you're going to run Unhallowed Essence Multishot. And I think these are the ideal affixes for the bow. Having the attack speed here is really nice because it multiplies through the rest of your build. So it's really good. Definitely aim for attack speed if you can get it. But again, here you can also potentially get like area damage if you wanted to, or cooldown reduction if it just helps to fit into your build that way. Or even, you know, get some vitality if you really, really need it. The legendary gems that I use, we have Zai Stone of Vengeance. Again, kind of playing into that ranged build. For damage that you deal is increased by a certain percent based on the rank for every 10 yards between you and the enemy that gets hit. And it has a maximum range at 50 yards. And also the secondary power here that you get at rank 25, 20% chance on hit to stun the enemy for 1 second. So you can get some nice CC out of it, but ideally you just want that damage. It's a nice multiplier to your damage, and if you stand at range, which you usually are, then it'll just help you destroy enemies from far away. Plays very nicely with the set, and the powers on the set. Next up is Bane of the Powerful. This is our elite killing gem. We want this because elites are the main thing that we're after for progression through the greater rifts, and this just helps you kill them even faster. So Bane the Powerful gain 20% increased damage for a certain amount of seconds based on the rank after killing an elite pack, and then the secondary unlock, you gain 15% increased damage versus elites, and you take 15% reduced damage from elites. So a very nice gem, again, for when you're targeting elites and killing them very quickly. And then last but not least, the Bane of the Trapped, one of the strongest DPS gems in the game. It increases damage against enemies under the effects of control impairing effects by a certain percent based on the rank, and then the 25 unlock is gain an aura that reduces the movement speed of enemies within 15 yards by 30%. We're not so concerned about that in this build because again it is a ranged build, so we should never be proccing the slow by being in proximity to the enemies. But because we run Thrill of the Hunt, which is a passive that demon hunters have, where enemies get slowed by your hatred spenders, then you're proccing the Bane of the Trap, and also the Cull the Weak passive too, which we do not have on the bar here, but we do have as a passive on our amulets, and so I'll show you it here. Increased damage against slowed or chilled enemies by 20%. So just another multiplier to get you some extra damage against slowed enemies. Kind of helps with the synergy in the build. Alright, so let's go over the skills here. I kind of did this in a different order than I normally do, but might as well switch it up a little bit every now and again. Gave you the gear rundown, and now we'll give you the skill rundown. So again, a generator build, so you need, or a focus and restraint build, so you need a generator. Here we have Evasive Fire with Focus. It's pretty much the standard generator that you use. I believe the Focus Rune just helps you get some more hatred back. You don't really care about the element on it. Again, it is a fire build, and that's mostly from the multi-shot. The generator is just there because it's a very quick one. Spreads out, it hits everything instantly, so it's nice. Next up is multi-shot with Arsenal. This is our main damage dealer in the build. Like I mentioned, a fire build, 25 hatred cost. And then every time you shoot out multi-shot with Arsenal, you launch 3 rockets at nearby enemies that each deal 300% weapon damage as fire. And that becomes important because of a passive that we take. And I'll just showcase it to you now. Ballistics increases the damage of rockets by 100%, and in addition, you have a 20% chance to fire a homing rocket for 150% weapon damage when you attack. So it's helping to multiply that damage from using the Arsenal rune on multi-shot. So you can see a lot of things are affecting each other throughout the build to just continue to multiply the damage further and further. We love Vault. That is one of the best movement skills in the game, so you gotta have it for the Demon Hunter when you're doing speed stuff. Since you're doing speed greater rifts, you're gonna be killing enemies very quickly and then needing to make up the distance to move to the next enemies. So you're going with Vault with Tumble. Tumble just helps you reduce the cost of your next Vault, since it is a discipline heavy, well, not that heavy, but you know, it does use up some discipline, so if we can cut the cost on it, we will. And like I mentioned, you want to be making sure to not use up all your discipline because it does affect your damage output, which is why we take Preparation Invigoration. So not only does Preparation Invig permanently increase your max discipline by 20, which is going to boost your damage, but every time that you activate Preparation, you can instantly restore 30 discipline. So basically, if you vault a bunch and you use up your discipline, go ahead and hit Preparation and it'll get some of your discipline back, and so you'll be able to do more damage right away and hopefully kill the enemy threat in front of you. There's a slight cooldown on this, 45 seconds. But again, we have some cooldown reduction in the build, so it won't take quite that long. Next up, Companion, Wolf Companion. This is one of the best companions for dealing some extra damage. Whenever you activate it, the wolf howls, and it grants you and your allies within 60 yards a 15% increased damage for 10 seconds. And the wolf itself attacks and does some minimal damage, but mostly you want it for that buff to your own damage. You can use it against elites to really kill them very quickly, burst them down. You can use it throughout the rift, like whenever it's off cooldown. Really doesn't matter all that much. It's a pretty quick cooldown. And then last but not least, for our active skills, we have Vengeance with Seethe. Vengeance is kind of that transformation skill. Boosts up the Demon Hunter, does some additional damage when you're into Vengeance. 40% increased to be precise. And then you have some additional like things, side guns and homing rockets. You shoot some more rockets when you're in Vengeance, which again helps with Ballistics. But mostly we like Vengeance with Seethe as the rune because we gain 10 hatred per second when we're in Vengeance. So it's helping to fight off some of that resource cost that we're using when we're spending our multi-shot. Next up for passives, I have Awareness because I play hardcore, so I don't like to die. And since you are going without the Wraps of Clarity, then you might want to have Awareness because there are potential moments where maybe you have too many enemies that jump on you and suddenly you need to proc this. But if you're playing softcore, you might be able to sub this out for something like Steady Aim, just another passive that helps you deal some more damage. Consider that. Next up is Ambush. Like I mentioned, we have this passive that synergizes nicely with the other side of the Dead Man's Legacy quiver. So for Ambush, you deal 40% additional damage to enemies above 75% health. So when they're above 75%, you're dealing this additional 40% additional damage. And then when they're at 60% or below with the quiver, then you're dealing double damage with your multi-shot. So you can see there's only a small time when you're not doing some additional damage based on their health. Very nice. Next, like I mentioned, Thrill of the Hunt helps you get your slows procced. Enemies that get hit by your hatred spenders are slowed. So the first time you hit an enemy, they won't be slowed, but then you hit them with your spender, then they're slowed, and then now they're taking effect from all of your slow, impaired, boosted passives and Bane of the Trapped and things like that. And so there is some consideration for cold multi-shot. There's a rune for multi-shot that's cold and does some slowing, and so that you're instantly benefiting from your slow-based damage boosters. So there is some potential to go with a cold build instead, but there are no rockets with that one, so you wouldn't run Ballistics, for instance. And then previously mentioned Ballistics increases your damage on rockets. Let's hop over to the cube. Previously mentioned, we have the Dawn, so that reduces some of your cooldown for Vengeance. And then we have the Visage of Gunes. Vengeance gains the effect of the Dark Heart rune. The Dark Heart rune on Vengeance gives you a 50% damage reduction. So that's nice, just again to make sure if we are getting hit by enemies and things like that, that we're not getting fully chunked out right away. Be able to survive a little bit. And then, as also mentioned throughout the little gameplay session that we had, the Convention of Elements. This rotates through your different elements, and then when it lands on fire, you can go absolutely balls to the wall, and you'll have a 200% increase in your elemental damage during that 4-second window. So it's pretty strong, but it might not also be necessary in this build. One of the things that I could recommend to you is instead swapping this with a Ring of Royal Grandeur, and then you could swap out, you know, another piece for something that's ancillary maybe. So maybe swap out the helm, go with the Visage of Gunes, and then instead of cubing the Visage, then you could maybe cube a Cinder Coat, and then that would help with some of your resource cost as well. You'd be able to just spam out more multi-shots without worrying about your resources too much, because it would cut that fire damage resource costs. There are many options you could consider, so if you feel that you're too overpowered and you don't need the convention, then consider going with a Ring of Royal Grandeur and potentially swapping some things around. And then last but not least, let's talk Paragon very quickly. The priorities will be that in the core section, you want to max out that movement speed to 25%, because like I mentioned on your boots, you're going to want to have multi-shot damage there, so there's no space to get some additional movement speed affixes. So max that out, put the rest into dexterity. Offensive-wise, you want to go for cooldown reduction first, so that you can get to that 37% cap for the CDR to have a permanent uptime on Vengeance. Then I would probably go critical hit damage, and then critical hit chance, and then attack speed. You can kind of do them in whatever order based on how your gear is looking and based on what you think you need, but definitely cooldown reduction first. Defense, I would go all resist, and then armor percent, then life percent, then life regen. And then in utility, I would go area damage, and then resource cost reduction, then life per hit, and then gold fine, which you don't really care about since this is mainly for greater rifts. But you can also adapt this build to regular rifts as well. There are some ways, like for instance when I was talking about using that Ring of Royal Grandeur, then you could take a Gloves of Worship for your glove slot and then benefit from some shrines which don't appear in greater rifts. So definitely a few ways to skin the cat. But that's going to do it for us here today. I hope you enjoyed this explanation on how to do the Unhallowed Essence Multishot in greater rifts when you're trying to speed through. Really, honestly, can't be beat. It's one of the fastest builds out there for Demon Hunters. A great option, so definitely consider it in Season 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to hop into the comments section and let me know. Let me know if you're going to plan to play this, if you have great familiarity with Unhallowed Essence already, what you've learned, and then feel free to like the video if you think it's really cool or really good. And I'll be seeing you in Season 10. Get hyped! March 31st coming up. We'll be seeing you guys. Have a good one.